Chapter 81. The Fall of Black Whip. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Black Whip didn't have a clue where these suicidal buggers had come from. All he'd wanted to do was go squish some frogs, in order to clear the way for construction upon Grey Fjord Port. Why were they suddenly being attacked by a whole bunch of tough customers like these? They were a real challenge to handle. All his subordinates had already been locked down. The native frogmen themselves were barely contributing to the fight at all, trading blows with the skeletons over here, attempting some harassment over there. Long years of combat experience had honed his senses to a razor's edge. Reaching behind himself, he snatched someone out of the shadows, just as they were about to stab him in the back. Black Whip had never known the meaning of holding back. He took one glance at the other players rushing in to the rescue, then snapped his prisoner's neck with one savage motion. All of a sudden, the would-be assassin stopped trashing about, and went still, but Black Whip wasn't finished. Squeezing harder, he tore the head right off in a fountain of blood. Tossing the corpse aside, he licked the blood off his lips. It was a terrifying sight to witness. Normally, such a gruesome display would have been enough to make any approaching enemies wet themselves. Even if they didn't turn tail and flee immediately, they would have all but lost the will to fight. And yet, these unknown assailants seemed to pay no heed to the death of their comrade, never breaking in their charge towards him. Black Whip spat, drew back his whip, and with a flick of his wrist, sent the incoming attackers flying away from him. A young mage nearby hurled fireballs and frost bolts at him. Somewhere in the flurry of spells were a few crossbow bolts as well, fired by a hunter. It was all in vain. The sinew from the tail of a silkwhip scorpion formed the core of his whip, which had then been wrapped in the leather of a swamp crocodile. From there, master alchemists and craftsmen had, through a complicated series of procedures, shaped it into the final product. Not only was the whip impervious to blades, it could deflect anything short of advanced magic as well. It could strike with devastating force, and the finesse with which he used it made him a unique opponent to face. This was where he got his name from. With the slightest twitch of the whip, he knocked aside the incoming projectiles. Ha! As he was about to strike down those enemy warriors closest to him before dealing with that mage and his hunter friend, Black Whip ducked suddenly, dodging a vicious slash from the side. Having whiffed his attack, this rogue moved to retreat back into the shadows, but Black Whip was faster. The whip coiled around the rogue's throat and yanked him over. You again. How? Seeing the man's face, Black Whip froze in shock. It was the same man whose head he'd ripped off just a moment ago. Twin brothers. He'd heard rumors of assassin guilds training twin brothers for such purposes. As he thought about this, he noticed the warriors he'd beaten down earlier being healed rapidly by a young girl with silver twin tails. Something like the radiant priests of the brilliant white church. Black Whip's eyes narrowed. He twisted the whip, snapping the man's neck once again, then discarded the corpse as he moved to eliminate the girl first. He had no qualms about killing women. The only good enemy was a dead one. Joe, taunt him, the young mage called out. Another young man, who'd been lying on the ground, rolled onto his feet. Banging a fist to his chest, he roared, Piss.wad. Black Whip felt an indescribable fury swell within himself. Actually, first he'd kill that twerp with the filthy mouth. But he had a tight grip on his whip, and its innate magic resistance helped him to keep hold of his senses. Dismissing the last vestiges of that stray impulse, he proceeded with his original plan, and bore down on the healer girl. He was right on top of her now. He only had to fend off another volley from the mage and hunter duo, and then nothing could stop him from ending the girl's life. Black Whip stared as the girl hefted her iron-bound grimoire, and shoved it in his face. Phoenix Impact. What the hell kind of impact involved a phoenix? As the hardcover tome knocked him into the air, Black Whip thought he saw the words, Holy Bible, emblazoned across the front. Probably a sacred text from the girl's religion. Does your God know about how you've been throwing around his divine words? He roared inwardly. In his divine kingdom high above, Shi Wei saw what had been wrought, and he saw that it was good. Black Whip fell hard to the ground, spewing blood, and decided that he'd taken more damage in that one hit than he'd suffered throughout the whole campaign. I see. I thought she looked frail and helpless, but it turns out she's your real trump card. No wonder the mage and the hunter had seemed faintly amused by his charge towards her, and had only made a half-hearted attempt to intercept him. Black Whip felt he'd seen through the enemy's tactics. Now, the way things were going, it'd be best to retreat. He brought his whip around to swat aside the foes who stood in his way, and then make good his escape. This time, however, a bladed whip shot in from the opposite direction, tangling up his whip and preventing any further attacks with it. Black Whip turned and saw an imperious figure, a young lady with golden hair, who regarded him with a wicked leer. It's all over. Your Society of the Secret Eye shows no concern for the lives of the common folk, pillaging and razing as you please, and trafficking in dangerous materials and creatures. The young mage declared grandiloquently. Your defeat was preordained. It will begin with the downfall of Vala. He raised his staff high into the air, and a blue radiance gathered at its tip. Eat this. Frost, Spear of Victory. Elena cried. A ray of golden light lanced through the air. Distracted by the mage and his extravagant flourishes, no one noticed that the girl had already impaled Black Whip to an enormous tree nearby. Blard, I'm dead, Black Whip announced. Edward stared. The orb of blue light quivered atop his staff. He felt as though he'd sneezed, and then had to suck it all back in. It was not a great feeling. At last, he shot the blue light up into the air, as a signal. It exploded in the gloom of night like a brilliant blue firework. Black Whip has been slain. Resistance is futile. Surrender while you can. Edward continued with his pompous grandstanding, urging the remaining Secret Eye troops to lay down their arms. Chapter 82. Don't stop now. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Things went exactly as Edward had predicted. Following Black Whip's demise, the enemies no longer had the stomach to continue the fight. It was either surrender or die. Looking upon their prisoners. War, Edward felt a tinge of annoyance, unsure of what to do with them. At last, the empathetic Vela offered him a solution. Lord Angora was talking about building more dungeons back in town. Have the players transport our captives there. When the players had smashed the last skeletons that the bone incense had drawn over, they all simultaneously received a system announcement. Quest complete. Expedition. Defend the Frogmen. Thanks to your tireless efforts, the dark forces of the Society of the Secret Eye, from the Vala Empire, deeper within the continent, have been brought to a halt. From this day forward, no one will dare to trifle with the unnamed town. Cheers to your valor, for saving the Frogman tribe, and eradicating evil. Quest reward. A barbecue party will be held in the Frogman village tonight. You may rest there for a while. Money and experience points will soon be credited directly to players. Reward points will be calculated and awarded shortly, as well. Please note that the points can only be exchanged for items during the event period, 7 days. The system will shut down for upgrading momentarily. In the meantime, certain functions, e.g. quest assignments, may not be available, but player abilities and skills will still work as normal. Thank you for your attention. A moment later, the newly received experience points caused most of the players to light up as they gained a level. Basking in their hard-won victory, the mood was merry all around. As the players made plans on where to meet up again, there were some who were beginning to miss the small town life. However, the majority of the players would be attending the barbecue party. They left in 2s and 3s, laughing and chatting as they made their way back towards the village. The frogmen felt tremendously fond of these humans who'd helped them to throw back their aggressors. Only the Elder and Krakatoa, as well as a few others, were actually able to speak their language. However, every time their eyes met, they would exchange a warm Hakuna Makrokrok or Rua. Those were the official greetings. Now, many of the players participating in this event had heard about the trick that Alina had played on the frogmen, and were raucously attempting conversation across linguistic barriers. Having gained a nice haul for himself this time, Edward was following everyone to the party when he noticed Alina trudging dejectedly behind him. "Is something the matter, Alina?" She was the youngest survivor from the village, and Edward couldn't help but fuss over her. "Edward, do you think the god of games has met with some kind of trouble?" Alina's dainty brow was furrowed. She was deeply worried about something. "Are you talking about that guard?" "Probably an ordinary circumstance." Edward crossed his arms. "We're talking about an omnipotent being, here. What could he possibly have trouble with?" "You're thinking too much." Alina nodded vaguely, but she wasn't fully convinced. Hugging her enormous, weapons-grade grimoire to herself, she prayed in silence. Even if it was just a little, she'd be happy if her faith could be of some use to her god. At the moment when Shiwei received this sincere moment of prayer, the glowing orb of his divine form was lying slumped on the floor, like a mound of slime. He'd overestimated himself somewhat. Having only just assimilated the rotten bones god, he'd rushed over and gulped down a completely different category of divinity. This indigestion of the imminent had resulted in an excruciating experience. It wasn't that big a deal, but it was profoundly uncomfortable, similar to what follows a careless bout of over-eating, when one is being afflicted by both indigestion as well as constipation. Honestly, Shiwei could swear that his orb form had swelled a little in size. This trickle of faith. Is it coming from Alina? No personal wishes or desires attached, just her absolute faith in me. That explains the purity of it. Shiwei was actually startled by her faith. She certainly was the saint of his order. He'd chosen well. After he'd absorbed that offering of purest faith energy, he felt a little better. It was probably just his imagination. For a divine being, this amount of faith was next to nothing, not even good enough to pick his teeth with. High-quality faith was great and all, but compared to the remnants of a divine avatar, it was less than a single drop of water in a vast ocean. Few understood this like Shiwei did, but he wouldn't let it get him down, instead urging himself to keep forging onwards. There were many souls echoing in his mind now, and he felt the touch of powers that he wasn't entirely comfortable with. He decided to complete the process of assimilation as soon as possible, and then dump the body somewhere. No choice, he told himself, his shape still distended beyond relief. This world is not the sort of place where we have the luxury to grow stronger in the fullness of time. Remembering the twin blades suspended on horse hairs overhead, one from the ocean god and the other from the skull god, Shiwei whipped himself into action. Even if he was only doing it for the sake of his followers, and for the sake of preventing another tragedy like what happened to Tierra, he couldn't stop in his quest to grow stronger. Looking down from the heavens upon his players, eating and singing in the frogman village, smiling contentedly to themselves, Shiwei whispered, "I won't stop. As long as you keep going, I'll be waiting for you up ahead. So don't you stop either, alright?" Though he said this, he wouldn't actually be getting anything done with bluster alone. There was a limit to his capacity at the moment, and it wasn't as though he had any medicine for it lying around the place. At this rate, it could take quite a while for him to finish digesting the aquatic lord. Nothing for it but to keep stumbling along, then. I'll need to come up with some way to squeeze more faith out of my followers. I just finished processing another bit of the aquatic lord, so I should be able to manage that much, at least. Still, this Windows 98 speed just isn't cutting it. At this thought, Shiwei transformed the faith energy into divine power, and poured it into his PC, Pantheon computer. Originally, he'd manifested this computer out of his divine power in order to help him manage player data and quests. It was lagging behind nowadays, so it was time for an upgrade and some streamlining. After a fair bit of miracle magic, the PC was born anew. Arise, Windows XP. Chapter 83. Follow where you are listening at novelfull.audio. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. The players had a merry night at the Frogman village. Although the Frogmen had initially been surprised by the inexplicable appearance of a bonfire, barbecue implements, and assorted seafood in the village square, they eventually attributed it to a divine blessing, which was apparently all the explanation they needed to let loose and party hard with the human players all night long. But nothing good lasts forever. The next day, the players gradually took their leave of the village and returned to the unnamed town. After all the events and quests had been done, there was nothing in the village worth hanging around for. There were sea monsters to challenge, sure. But none of the players were expert divers, plus they lacked the numbers for it, and anyway it would be an enormous hassle, for little to no returns. In comparison, the unnamed town housed the Living Dead Cellar dungeon, as well as the Valley of the Tragic Dead, which had thus far been explored up to 22%. Those players who'd leveled up and gained some new loot from the latest quest were understandably eager to test things out, even if bumping into the Rotten Bones Archbishop or one of the black-robed bishops in the Living Dead Cellar would most likely end with their gruesome deaths all the same. "Are you leaving already?" Krakatoa asked a group of players, led by Edward. "Nothing else for it." Edward laughed. "We only came to help out, and now that the matter has been resolved, we ought to take our leave." "And the Lady Saint?" Krakatoa turned towards Alina. He wasn't referring to her as a saint because he was aware of her position as a saintess. In training, but because all the frogmen had come to regard her as a genuine saint for the Aquatic Lord. It was a pity that Shiwei was about to destroy the Aquatic Lord's divine avatar, just as Alina had inspired a higher level of faith from the frogmen. "Of course Alina would wish to leave with us." Immediately, Edward interposed himself in front of her. It had been funny while it lasted, but Alina was a saint for the god of games, and she couldn't keep going around masquerading as an icon for other religions. If she carried on pulling stunts like that, then as the one who'd backed her up in the first place, he might end up falling out of their god's good graces. Krakatoa was silent for a moment. Then he looked up at Edward. Could I maybe join you on your adventures?" Edward's first instinct was to refuse, until he caught sight of the hopeful light in Alina's eyes. As he waffled about in indecision, he was suddenly presented with a system data window. So the system was back online already. Following this assumption, Edward read on. Game version 0.2 upgrade complete, player max level raised to 60, new mage specialization added. Tide Caller description. The Tide Caller is a mage who foregoes all other elements in order to master elemental water. Raging blizzards, mighty tsunamis, and invincible water elementals are all theirs to command. Summon the power of the waves, and rise above all others. Click here to watch a demonstration video. Prerequisites: any mage at level 15 or higher may attempt the class. Change quest. The Tide Caller was, true to its name, able to create, or actually, summon, water out of nowhere, and then wield it to do battle as a mage. Watching the trailer video, there seemed to be three main builds to choose from. Arctic, attacking with ice and frost, or freezing enemies solid. Current, increasing the flow of water to create tidal waves or high-pressure water blades, employing water purely in its liquid form. Wake, summoning support creatures out of elemental water. New cleric specialization added. Aquatic Angel description. Rather than divine grace and heavenly boons, this servant of the god of games has been inspired to hear the song of the oceans. They form bonds with leviathan creatures long dormant in the depths, and train to become accustomed to underwater movement themselves, so that these clerics are formidable powerhouses in their own right. Click here to watch a demonstration video. Pre-requisites: any cleric at level 15 or higher may attempt the class. Change quest. Taking the Aquatic Angel specialization would result in a drop in the effectiveness of the cleric's basic spells, but in exchange, they would gain enormous boosts to their stats, shifting from a support class to a character capable of both tanking as well as dealing out substantial damage. They had the following builds to choose from. Deep Hunter: summon agile and fearsome sea monsters such as an ichthyosaur or a mosasaurus, for tremendous damage potential. Abomination: summon terrifying beings from the darkest depths of the oceans, like nightmares made real, and manifest them to fight at your behest. Trident: enter into contracts with wondrous creatures which, although not truly divine, are able to wield miraculous powers nevertheless, as paragons of their kind. Summon an aspect of them onto the battlefield to provide beneficial auras and combat support. Follower feature introduced. Players can now hire followers at designated areas, requires reputation of friendly or better. Followers will have their own stats, but they won't be able to level up on their own. Their employer will have to manually assign points in their attributes window. Upon their death, their progress towards the next level will be reset to 0. If they had less than 10% XP when they died, their employer will have to pay a corresponding fee at a life stone in order to revive them. You may now hire followers at Grey Fjord Port. Frogman Village: reputation system active in Grey Fjord Port. Frogman Village: new dungeon added. Grey Fjord Port. Shallows: there was a lot of new material this time around, but Edward isolated the main point straight away. At last, there were now specializations for mages. He'd no longer have to feel inferior around spirit swordsmen and shadow rogues. Seeing the specialization on offer though, he felt a certain sense of apprehension. Busting out a tsunami sounded beyond awesome, but giving up the other elements felt like a raw deal for a mage. Elena, meanwhile, seemed delighted. She checked her current reputation with the Frogman Village, and found that she was revered. Thus, she turned to address the frogmen before her. Krakatoa, are you serious about joining our adventuring party? Yeah. Seeing Edward's long silence, a despairing Krakatoa was now nodding fervently. Then from this day forward, you'll be my follower. Hands on her hips, the girl nodded as she made this decree, immensely pleased with herself. In response, the name that floated over Krakatoa's head, written in green text to indicate he was a friendly character, now switched to white, like the players' own names. Alongside a scrawl of indecipherable letters in an unfamiliar language, he also gained a title. Landwalker, Krakatoa, Sr. Chapter 84. Wake up, there are chores to do. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. The follower system obviously wasn't just a random idea Shi Wei had while stalking his believers. In reality, he had already been mulling the idea over ever since he redesigned the Pantheon computer. Since most current frogmen were still believers of the Aquatic Lord, even if Shi Wei absorbed the divinity of the Aquatic Lord, as long as he didn't inherit the god's deific properties and divine order, he still wouldn't be able to gain many followers from the frogmen. BVEC. Along the same line of thought, it would be difficult for him to give blessings to the frogmen too. Shi Wei couldn't even show the full extent of his divine grace to the frogmen either. To make a simple comparison, say the path of faith between Shi Wei and other players was 5G, and that various video clips, photos, and powers could be shared between them instantaneously, then the connection between him and the frogmen was basically dial-up internet. Even a low-resolution image could take upwards for half an hour to load, and even then there were a high risk of an unable to load error popping up. Even though you couldn't give divine grace purely through the path of faith, doing so without it would require extra divine power, and using that many resources on a normal frogman felt somewhat wasteful. So to more efficiently farm divine energy, Shi Wei decided to use his already existing believers, the players, to act as a halfway point. As long as the frogmen swore their loyalty to any player, a contract would immediately be formed. The basic point of the contract was that their divine energy will be transferred from the aquatic lord over to that player's main deity, the god of games, for safekeeping. The contract needed agreement from both parties involved, in this case that would be the aquatic lord and the god of games. The divine order of the aquatic lord was currently in Shiwei's control, so the contract would take effect immediately. If it were this easy to gain the divine energy from the believers of other deities, this could lead many to the question of, does this mean all I have to do is defeat a small deity and create contracts to gain total control of their divine energy? The short answer, no. This loophole was pretty difficult to exploit. The first and most important factor to Shiwei's success was that there wasn't any previous hostility between the aquatic lord and the god of games. The two stood completely independent from each other in a silent agreement of peace, so the aquatic lord didn't have time to react and retaliate when Shiwei struck. Next was the problem of having the frogmen willingly pledging their loyalty to Shiwei's believers. Divine energy wasn't something you could force out of someone. The true faith of an individual and their willingness to give it to you was of the utmost importance. Without it there wouldn't be any effect. Lastly, Shiwei attacked the aquatic lord at the perfect moment, right before his divinity's ascension. If Shiwei acquired God's divinity later into that process, his targets may have already gained self-awareness, causing the contract to be unable to form. If he had attacked earlier and the god's divinity hadn't ascended to this level, they wouldn't have been viewed by the contract as a proper deity, again rendering the contract useless. It was under these series of coincidences and Shiwei's explicit use of a loophole that he was able to do an under-the-table job of acquiring divine energy from the frogmen. The divine energy gained from the frogmen was used by Shiwei to fully absorb the aquatic lord's divinity. It was sort of like borrowing money from someone to buy a rope to strangle them with. In a way, Shiwei did feel bad for the poor aquatic lord. After the follower system came online, players who participated in the Doused Crusade event were quite intrigued, rushing to persuade a frogman to become their follower. Although the frogmen were pretty weak in combat, occasionally losing to even the most basic skeletons in solo combat, because they were similar to the felines in M***H***ter in the fact that they didn't take up a party slot, players could use them as bait or meat shields during their raids, since they could be revived with a little bit of gold. Plus, the frogmen were still pretty low level, even Krakatoa was only at level 5, who knows how strong they could become in the future. Even Princess Leia, who, after regaining her rationality, hid in a corner in embarrassment and skipped the banquet, couldn't help but run out to convince Krakatoa to become her follower after the system announcement was made. She was pretty disappointed when she found out Krakatoa had already become Alina's follower. So she changed her target to the village elder. Do not underestimate the village elder of the frogmen with his rickety old bones. In reality, he had the highest damage out of all the frogmen during their last fight with the Society of the Secret Eye, swinging his walking stick around with the precision of a trained swordsman. You wouldn't be able to tell from his usual frail appearance, but he could almost overtake a couple of low-level players. After a long stretch of silence, the village elder told Leia that he had already been chosen by the gods to become the leader of the frogman tribe. The princess could only hide her face as she turned away after receiving a daily quest from the elder system that helped players farm reputation. To have a system like that under his control, it meant that he was an overlord recognized by the god of games just like Angora and Old Man Vank. Leia couldn't just take one of his overlords away. After the untiring diligence of players, they finally failed all of their attempts. And after many failed attempts, players concluded two main issues. The first was that they didn't have enough reputation built up. The reputation system had only just been implemented in the Frogman village, their relationship with players was only at the basic friendly level, meeting the requirements to recruit as a follower. However, the only person who successfully did so was Alina, who was already at the level of admiration among the frogmen. After all, she was viewed as a saintess by the frogmen, her base reputation was off the charts. So players thought that the higher your reputation, the higher your success rate of recruiting a follower. The second problem was the language barrier. The already recruited Krakatoa and the unable to be recruited village elder were the only two frogmen who spoke Shumonian. The rest of the frogmen weren't too intelligent, and without Krakatoa or the village elder acting as interpreters, even if players incorporated hand gestures and body language, it would only end as an unwinnable game of charades, neither party getting any point across. When players went in to recruit, the frogmen not only ignored their requests, a bunch of them would gather around and watch in amusement as players made a fool of themselves. If friendly fire had been enabled, it was certain that many players would have stormed the village in their frustration. The solution to these two problems wasn't difficult, in fact it was quite easy, it was all in two words. Daily quests. Prestige not high enough. A daily quest is just the thing you need. Daily quests granted some prestige. If you do them long enough, you would end up at admiration level for sure. Language barrier. I'm sure the overlords still have a daily quest for you. After you've built up enough reputation you'll be able to unlock a special mission from the village elder. After that mission is completed you'll receive a unique item called the Frogman Whisperer. It's a small necklace with a frog the size of your fingernail. Equip that and you'll be fluent in the frogman's language. Basically, when players first read the system announcement, it felt like the benefits of followers were written all across the screen in tiny writing, but once they looked into the fine print, the whole page was basically filled with daily quests. Players who weren't interested in participating in manual labor promptly backed off gaining a follower. The ones that remained were those that either didn't think there was much difference in doing routine quests in the Frogman village and in the unnamed town or that were real die-hard fans of the Frogman tribe. Chapter 85. A Day of Rest. Part 1. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Since Shi Wei had to relax and rest to properly digest the Aquatic Lord's Divinity Shard, the players had found themselves with a lot more free time than usual. Well, maybe it wasn't free time per se. After all, even the highest level players were only around a measly level 30, and the new level cap was now raised to level 60. It was as if Shi Wei was using this simple method to tell his players, the grind never stops. You still have a long way to go, so keep at it. But players really didn't have much to do. The unnamed town, the underground hideout of Lancaster, the Frogman village, all of them had their own daily missions to help gain reputation. Only 25% of Valley of the Tragic Dead had been explored, and the newly opened shores of the Grey Fjord port had only had 1% of its explorable area uncovered. A lot of players drowned out at sea since they hadn't unlocked the swimming skill yet, needing to employ the help of the frogmen to drag their floating corpses back to shore, and then get revived by cleric players or the Frogman village elder. A life stone had also been erected in the middle of the Frogman village, allowing players sleeping with the fish to be able to instantly respawn at the Frogman village. Though it didn't have much purpose aside from helping players save some leg time. But now players could teleport to the unnamed town and the underground hideout of Lancaster through the life stone by spending some in-game money. At first, Shi Wei was hesitant to place a life stone in the Frogman village, fearing that the ocean god would storm his divine kingdom if he found the Aquatic Lord's divinity to be missing. But then he figured that with so many players finishing their daily quests in the Frogman village, even without the life stone, the ocean god would probably be able to tell what had happened and invade his kingdom regardless. And without the ability to teleport, players entering and exiting the Frogman village would have to waste a lot of the village elder's time, causing progress to be slowed and overall efficiency to drop. In the end, Shi Wei decided that what would happen, and thus allowed the village elder to set the life stone in place. Overseeing all the players carrying out their daily round of quests with such enthusiasm, Shi Wei smiled down at them from the divine kingdom like a proud mother looking at her children. After closing down for a couple of days to let its boss do some business elsewhere, Iron Cauldron Tavern finally reopened, and its business was booming as usual. Just as the owner was hanging up a notice saying, "We welcome our guests to bring their own ingredients, excluding aquatic angels, please do not treat your summons as ingredients to give to the chef," Joe walked in with his head hung low. Well, if it isn't Paul. Joe's full name was Joe Paul. Ivan saw him enter from his table with his teammates, greeting him brightly. I haven't seen you in 2 days. Have you been at the Frogman village doing your daily tasks? Since they were both warrior class players, they had a pretty decent relationship, sometimes getting together to eat or spar or clear raids, that sort of stuff. I don't want to talk about it. I took on a quest to go find some domesticable animals for the town's farm, but apparently all the frost season animals decided to go back into their burrows. I crawled through so many caves, fought through packs of dire bears, and spent 2 whole days out in some random ravine to find a snow-tailed deer that fits the quest's requirements. Joe had a dark expression. Guess what the quest's rewards were? What? Ivan asked curiously. In lieu of a reply, Joe started doing an extremely accurate rendition of the Gangnam-style dance. ENV, I asked you what your reward was and you start dancing. I mean, it's not a bad dance but still. Joe stopped after a while. Ivan gave him polite applause for his performance. Not bad, but what did that have to do with your quest? That was the reward, Joe lamented. After I finished the quest I unlocked the horse riding skill, but after activating it, that was what I got. So does the dance have any other effects? Like maybe it's a rally dance to buff you and your allies or something? Nope, Joe replied dryly, it's just a dance, nothing else. The other players in the tavern all gave an audible gasp, shocked by this turn of events. So what you're saying is, that the quest reward wasted one of your skill points to get this useless skill. Ivan furrowed his brows, thinking that this quest was a bit too evil. Skill points. No. The skill was straight up given to me, I didn't have to spend my skill points on it, Joe explained. It doesn't show up on the skill tree either. It opened up some weird collectibles tab, it had some other stuff in it too, I think. Oh, I see. Ivan nodded, deep in thought, then suddenly slamming his drink on the table. Boss, bill please. Paul, could you tell me where you obtained the quest? Yeah. Joe looked at Ivan in confusion, not understanding why he would ask such a question. You want to do it too. But this skill is pretty pointless. Ivan let out a sigh then laughed. It doesn't matter whether or not it's useful, I'm just a completionist I guess, I want to collect everything I can. Plus, your little dance seemed like fun, so I'd like to have it in my possession, since it doesn't waste a skill point anyways. I want in too. Ivan's teammates all joined in on the excitement. Stop joking, why would you want to learn this? Ivan frowned at his friends, scolding them in case Joe thought they were teasing him. Well, you see, the previous 2 banquets, even though I went, I kept feeling like something was missing. Well, for one, there weren't any female players there to chat up, but thinking about it now, there wasn't any dancing either. If I could dance, I'd look like such a baller. The player was practically drooling at his own fantasy. If I could do that dance during the next banquet, I'm sure it'll be great. After his enthusiastic speech, a few of the remaining players who were reluctant at first were now very much ready to participate. Yeah, since it doesn't use up any skill points, it wouldn't hurt to learn. Ahem, I'm personally a person of a higher standard, I just think the dance looks nice. Let's get those girls. Joe didn't care about keeping a secret, telling the guests of the tavern everything from the NPC they had to talk to the best spot to find a suitable animal. And thus, under the lead of Ivan, they went off on their journey to master the art of dance, thanking Joe for his help as they left the tavern. Leaving Joe alone in the building still trying to process what had happened. After a bit, he inexplicably started dancing again. I guess it's kinda fun. The Iron Cauldron's boss was watching the whole event play out from the sidelines after putting up his notice. It wasn't the first time something like this had happened. He could already see it, a bunch of players showing off their weird dances during the next banquet, their clunky armor not hindering them at all as they danced through the night. Oh, the chaos that would ensue. Chapter 86. Rules of the system. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Collectibles was one of the ways Shi Wei motivated his players to complete their daily quests. Among these collectibles were things like dances, various accessories that didn't take up an equipment slot, and some other fun tools that didn't have much practical use. He believed that the players who had gotten bored due to the recent peacefulness would start grinding through their daily tasks again. Of course, Shi Wei wasn't spending his time in the Divine Kingdom conjuring up ways to get players addicted. Aside from digesting the remaining bits of the Aquatic Lord's divinity still sitting in his stomach, he was wondering how he could improve his players' skills. After all, the enemies his players faced before weren't really deities like him, they were more like lesser gods that didn't have any godly blessing. But as his players' territory expanded, it was inevitable that they were going to face believers of much more powerful deities sooner or later. Other deities didn't have the power to transmigrate like Shi Wei could. Shi Wei could give blessings to players simply through the path of faith. In other words, without a path of faith he would have to do an honest job of creating miracles like the other deities, but other deities had to first get through the world barrier before giving their blessings. The larger the blessing or secret item being passed down, the more divine power it took to cross the world barrier. It was a hard limit on how much they could help their believers. This forced other deities to mainly train their believers to build into the elite roots. Other than saints, saintesses, and chosen ones, the players who could receive great blessings were either players who went through countless hurdles to get a high rank in the church, or players who have proven their faith in the deity and have ascended to the rank of devout believer. Other believers could only receive divine graces equal to their rank's sacred arts limit. It was much easier for Shi Wei. He could bypass all this struggle by dropping down into the mortal realm himself. They could eat food together, fight monsters together, and become stronger together. Once he had enough believers, at least a few of them were going to be immensely skilled players. It was simple logic. But Shi Wei had a couple things going against him as well. He had only just become a god not too long ago. He didn't have a stable presence in the minds of the players. Time and his number of believers were his two main deficits. Even his two strongest players, the Saintess in training Elena and the warrior Princess Leia, couldn't compare with the high-level believers of other churches. That's why he needed to find a way for his players to become stronger. Raising the level limit for his players was the most straightforward method, but he had already done so twice before, and his players had a ways to go before reaching the limit of 60, so raising it even higher wouldn't do much right now. He might as well save his divine power to do other things. If I fully digest the remaining divinity of the Aquatic Lord, I'll probably have enough energy left over to upgrade the system, maybe add a new function or something. If that was the case, should he make specializations? That could visibly increase his players' power. But after weighing up the pros and cons, Shi Wei decided to give up the specialization system. ENVE for one, the thing would require Shi Wei to make a completely new skill tree. That would take too much divine power. Shi Wei wasn't sure he could take it right now. It would be quite a mess if he ran himself dry and still couldn't create a fully functioning specialization system. Secondly, the current class system was pretty crap. Each class had only one reclassing option, so even if specializations were included in the game, it would probably just cause players to focus too heavily on single aspects of the game and affect the decision of experienced players to join his church. In the end, a huge group of players could end up with weird classes and skill trees. Shi Wei would have to then use up more of his divine power to create a skill point reset potion. It just felt like a waste. Shi Wei decided he had best leave specializations until after players got a full grasp of their classes. Then what about professions? Shi Wei thought to himself. What Shi Wei had in mind for professions, other than increasing production efficiency, was to create secondary classes to give players stat increases or abilities to buff their main combat classes. For example, players who chose the blacksmith class could have an increase in their strength. Those who chose the farmer class would deal increased damage with pole weapons like scythes and spears. Reporter class players could have improved movement speed and so on. Plus, he could make it so that when players that choose butcher prepares meat, the remaining carcasses wouldn't be automatically sent to the Divine Kingdom, thus not being able to gain experience. It could solve the ever-increasing storage problem in the Divine Kingdom, as well as make it so players didn't always have to go to Lancaster to import meat. To add on to, and to save divine power, Shi Wei could make it so profession skills couldn't be upgraded with skill points, instead requiring proficiency. In doing so, he could not only make his players' lives in game more than just daily quests, but also improve his players' combat capabilities. It was the perfect plan. And besides, this would help players who weren't that into battling show off their talents in other areas. Wouldn't that be great? After thinking it through, implementing the profession system seemed to have the biggest turnover. So now comes the question of, with my divine power, will I be able to finish this before I become a godly raisin? Shi Wei hesitantly wrapped his tendrils around the ball. According to the units of measurement he set in Chapter 1, Shi Wei's divine energy was barely over 50 units. As for how many he originally had, somewhere around 100, but after introducing 2 new classes and the follower system, he didn't have much left. Some of you may be wondering, but couldn't Shi Wei completely control the game system even before his divinity stabilized? Back then he was just a kid. Oh, I mean he only had 10 units of divine energy. The reasoning for that was simple, the original system was extremely basic. Even things like class-specific skills and abilities were simply set up by Shi Wei. The class system in place now had already been secretly updated by Shi Wei. Plus, there were only 5 people who had access to the system then. Now there were over 100 users, all waiting for their systems to be upgraded. Not to mention, Shi Wei was at a dead end. He felt like sitting around all day wouldn't do him any good, so he decided, what's the worst that could happen, and gambled up all of his remaining divine power. Even though he wasn't a mega-powerful deity or anything, there were still so many believers that relied on him now. He couldn't be as irresponsible or reckless as he was before. I'm probably the only deity in the world that's this responsible. Shi Wei muttered to himself, deciding that perhaps he should take a break and accumulate a tad more divine energy before building professions. Just as he was carrying out his daily routine of digesting the divinity sitting in his stomach and lying on his belly stalking his players, he froze. Shi Wei's expression turned serious. Don't ask me why a ball can have a serious expression, please use your imagination. He stared off into the ever-expanding nothingness. He felt a presence suddenly appear beyond his divine kingdom. Chapter 87. Who Goes There? You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Who goes there? That was what Shi Wei wanted to shout to the heavens, but for the sake of his safety, he wasn't going to simply come into contact with the other. In reality, he didn't even dare move. The Skull God and the Ocean God, those were the only 2 Shi Wei could think of who would waltz in unannounced. Sadly, our main protagonist couldn't fight off either one. If we had to compare, he could probably take 1 or 2 hits from the Skull God, but he would be immediately obliterated by the Ocean God. Looks like he would have to rely on his transmigration to hide out in the lower realm for now. Luckily, his visitor didn't seem to want to bust down his front door. This gave Shi Wei some time to quickly pack up his essentials. He was just about to get the rotten bones out of his juicer when he felt a feeling of kindness being sent from outside his divine kingdom, with its origins being the outsider deity. Now Shi Wei was confused. What kind of power move was this? Were they trying to trick him into going out, and then one shot him? It felt kinda pointless. Even if they didn't go through all this hassle, he'd still be no match for them. Could it be that it wasn't the Skull God or the Ocean God? Shi Wei thought it over a bit, deciding to leave the rotten bones in their little home and started to prepare for his transmigration. After carefully crossing over the Divine Kingdom's barrier, he came face to face with his unexpected guest. The first thing that came to his mind was, wow, those are some pale thighs. That's right. His guest was a large snow-white lion. And he had a full, thick mane encircling his neck. It was a male lion. Good day, young deity. The lion had a voice quite fitting for his appearance, a deep voice of a male in his late 40s, his words were filled with authority. Why is there a lion outside my divine kingdom? The scene was just too fantastical, wiring the circuits in Shi Wei's brain due to the overwhelming shock. A god's appearance didn't matter too much, as long as you're frugal with your divine power, you can easily become anything you'd like. You're just a ball as well, no? The other replied. After his brain rebooted itself, Shi Wei scanned through the memory bank of his divinity, because he received a portion of the aquatic lord's memory. His memory bank now was quite a bit bigger than before, and found that he indeed had a memory of this guy. Are you the legendary Lion King of Justice? Shi Wei was taken aback. The Lion King went by Aslan. In reality, he was the god of justice. He originally had a human form, but according to legends he had previously made a bet with his believers, and subsequently lost. Thus, to uphold the terms of the bet, he has maintained the form of a lion to this day. Yours truly. Aslan dipped his giant, white lion head, a proud smirk crossing the lion's face. The Aslan that, due to teachings that were too strict, forced a lot of his believers to break the rules and betray the Church of Justice, thus bearing the title of deity with the most betrayers for over 1,000 years. That Aslan. Ahem, I have since tweaked my teachings to fit mortal standards. There aren't as many betrayers now, the lion said between subtle coughs, switching the topic immediately. If you don't mind, can we have a chat in your divine kingdom? Even deities find it hard to stay in the void this long. His words caused Shi Wei to hesitate. This Lionhead's reputation was amazing among other deities. If given the chance to form an alliance with any deity, there were sure to be countless lawful gods who chose Aslan as their first choice. The problem was that the guy was definitely a lawful good in the DD alignment charts, but his justice felt suffocating at times. If he were to enter Shi Wei's divine kingdom, he might just lose it at the sight of the remains of the rotten bones god stuffed into his juicer. As the god of justice, Aslan was the bane of many evil deities, but even so, the Lion King was always active on their servers, with a sense of, I know you don't like me, but you don't have it takes to get rid of me, surrounding him 24/7. It was evident that he was an immensely powerful being. Even deities like the Skull God would most likely just become a toothpick for the god of justice. Don't worry, I've paid some attention to the actions of your believers recently. I know that you've gotten rid of that rotten bones fella. In doing so, his corpse and divinity are your spoils of war. As long as you don't become an evil deity, I will do you no harm. The lion could see Shi Wei's visible worry, assuring him kindly. Well, since his guest basically insisted, Shi Wei could only welcome him into his kingdom. As expected, the lion frowned slightly at the sight of the rotten bones god's corpse in the juicer, but didn't say anything besides that. Hey why are you here? Shi Wei used his tendrils to pass Aslan a bottle of coke. His guest downed the whole bottle, literally, in one gulp, letting out a belch before answering. As I've previously mentioned, I have been paying some attention to the actions of your believers, and I have noticed that your actions, be it storming the Rotten Bones Church, clearing out the dangers in the underground sewers, culling the revenants in the Valley of the Tragic Dead, or simply helping out weaker tribes fend off bandits, have all displayed a great sense of justice. You're not going to ask me to become one of your subordinates, right? A wrinkle formed on the surface of his sphere. Even though he couldn't best the other in a fight, Shi Wei wasn't going to become someone's little follower. Becoming a subordinate god of another deity had too many restrictions attached, and his unique ability of transmigration could easily be exposed. I, Aslan, have never sought a subordinate god. The lion roared proudly before continuing in a softer voice, I am here to seek an alliance. An alliance? Shi Wei was stunned. Correct, for lower-middle-tier deities like ourselves, further advancement is an incredibly difficult prospect. Recruiting new believers can also lead to unwanted altercations with other deities. Plus, the world of the gods has seen more peaceful days. This has led to many alliances being formed among deities. Aslan started slowly. Our alliance is the invisible pantheon and doesn't have many strict rules to follow. Each member of the alliance has agreed to peace among each other, at times when a strong evil deity is discovered, we will allow our believers to fight side by side, and then split the divinity among us or something. You must understand that times have been difficult, we can only live off of these evil deities. The feats of justice your believers have shown have moved me, thus I wish you will accept my invitation to join the invisible pantheon and become one of us. Shi Wei mulled it over in his head. What happens if one of your members are attacked by another deity? Unless it is one of the 7 divine fathers, we will definitely lend a hand in protecting one of our members under siege. Aslan shook his magnificent mane, reassuring Shi Wei. Then it's settled, from now on you will be my emergency plan. The surface of Shi Wei's spherical body shimmered, his tentacle wrapping around the lion's paw and shaking it up and down, quite the weird scene. Emergency plan. Just weird pronunciation, don't worry about it. Chapter 88. Player Forum. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. After Shi Wei agreed to join the invisible pantheon, Lion King Aslan turned tail to leave. That's it. I don't need to sign a contract or anything. Shi Wei asked curiously. Unless you can get one of the Trinity of Creation to act as an officiator, contracts don't have much control over our actions. Aslan shook his large white mane. And as I've previously stated, the details of our alliance is much more lax than most others. A black and white contract stating the rules would go against that philosophy. You can just treat it as an exclusive club of sorts. Then how can I contact you guys? Shi Wei asked hurriedly. Was he going to have to roam the void to find one of their allied deities' kingdom whenever he needed help? This would put a dent into his emergency plan, alliance, wouldn't it? When his enemies knocked on his front door, they sure weren't going to give him time to look for reinforcements. Don't rush, I was just about to tell you. Aslan sat on the floor like an oversized cat and ruffled his mane with his claw. And then something tiny fell out from the thick fur. At first, Shi Wei thought it was body lice, but after thinking it through, unless it was a lice god, there probably wasn't any lice that could live on Aslan's body. Scanning the object with his divination ability, Shi Wei realized that it was a small bunch of Aslan's hair, carrying Aslan's deific properties as well. Even something as small as hair was once part of a deity's being, so it's no surprise it could become the carrier of deific properties. The lion used his divine power to pass the clump of fur to Shi Wei, who had a disgusted expression. Thankfully he didn't have a face, if not the lion would probably be quite offended. This is a new glamour that's been gaining popularity among deities, it makes communication quite convenient. This furball carries my deific properties, whenever you want to find me, just imbue it with some divine power, the Lion King explained cheerfully, completely oblivious to Shi Wei's inner thoughts. After that, the god of justice Aslan left Shi Wei's divine kingdom and returned to his own territory. Once he was alone, Shi Wei started to study the furball more closely. Oh ho, it's this sort of glamour eh? Glamours were basically conduits of energy, you needed to imbue them with supernatural energy, divine energy, demonic energy, and the likes, for them to be activated. As mortals have a much lower affinity for these sorts of powers, they were unable to fully comprehend a large majority of glamours, needing years and years of research and determination to even begin to understand these divine practices. But for high-level beings such as deities, they could easily grasp what the humans could not. Using a less appropriate, but more straightforward metaphor, it's like how for a single dot on a piece of paper, it's difficult to know if the wall in front of itself was a triangle or a square, but for humans living in 3 spatial dimensions, finding out would be as simple as looking at the paper. The furball in Shi Wei's hand encompassed spectacular and intricate glamour, it used a divine index of different deities to connect divine kingdoms throughout the void regardless of distance. The knowledge of how this worked was far out of the league of mere mortals, it was basically impossible to understand and learn, only deities like Shi Wei and the others possessed the ability to use it. But this contraption did lead Shi Wei to an epiphany. Communication across time and space. Come to think of it, players usually just yell at each other to communicate. Shi Wei extended his tentacle to rub at what was presumably his chin. He had thought about the problem before. His original solution was to make a sort of emailing system for his players, allowing them to communicate with each other. On point 1, he wouldn't even have to cross the spatial barrier, since Shi Wei fully planned on becoming an operator to help redirect players' calls. It wasn't that there weren't better communication systems that could be implemented through the path of faith, but they all expended far too much. But with reference to this new and improved technique, he could save himself quite a bit of divine power. He didn't want to think about other details, but at least the power he currently had was definitely enough. Shi Wei felt a new thought emerge in his spherical body. Who knows, read more chapter on freewebnovel.com. Should I create a public chat, and then subsequent clan chats, team chats, and private chats? No, it'll be fine right now with not that many players, but once more and more players join, the public chat will be constantly updating and a lot of important messages might get missed. But if there isn't a public chat, socializing among players will become quite limited. After some deep thought, Shi Wei decided to create a player communication platform in a forum style. To build a forum, he would first need a server. Shi Wei's gaze fell on the hardworking Pantheon Computer XP, a smirk crossed his spherical face. I choose you, XP. Thus, Shi Wei added even more functions to the diligent little XP. Since there weren't too many players currently, the little computer should be able to handle it. After the number of active players increases, our XP would surely have upgraded to a Sunway Tehulite one. After finishing up, Shi Wei typed out a system message to alert all players. Ding! Game system version 0.21 has been fully upgraded, the player forum page has been added, now you can discuss anything you want there. As the forum page had only just been opened, its contents were still completely empty, only having Shi Wei's introduction to the page showing on the top. In the message, he briefly described what the forum was, what functions it had, and also listed the rules of the forum, banning certain inappropriate behavior and writing out the corresponding punishments. Originally Shi Wei had thought that with how rowdy his believers were, all he had to do was wait a couple of minutes before the forum became filled with random, weird, and funny posts. But Shi Wei waited over an hour and the only message in the forum was his, sitting all alone at the top. After another hour, a new post finally appeared. The poster was Warrior Princess Leah. She pretty much just sung praise for the God of Games in her post, with many players following her lead in the comments. Even Shi Wei was cringing at their obviously faked enthusiasm. The situation weirded Shi Wei out, since when did his group of players become so civilized? But he quickly figured out the cause. As the moderator of the forum, Shi Wei used very official language in his introductory post, plus a lot of the rules he set had the unmistakable underlying tone of, I'm your father. Players had most likely guessed that the creator of the forum was the one and only deity himself. No matter how rowdy they were still first and foremost believers of Shi Wei. Since they were given this system, they obviously had a decent amount of respect and admiration toward Shi Wei as a deity. They couldn't just show their roughest sides to the deity right away. That's why Leah, the only person who had come face to face with the deity, could muster up the strength to post about how amazing Shi Wei was. Do you guys really think I don't know how you are usually? Shi Wei couldn't help but diss his little believers. But he wasn't worried that the forum would continue being as quiet as it was. As long as he didn't speak and break his cover, most players would naturally relax in the forum and start showing their true colors. Just as Shi Wei was thinking this, a new post suddenly appeared in the forum. Save the children. We need help. Chapter 89. Jom and Terry, you are listening at novelfull.audio. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Jom and Terry were walking in a snow-covered forest. They were friends formed during difficult times. Later in the refugee camp on the outskirts of Wikidor, the two were chosen by Marnie to become believers of the God of Games in the unnamed town. Jom, why are we going this far away? The warrior-dressed Terry looked about 12 or 13 years of age, due to previous malnourishment he hadn't gotten to hit puberty yet, his thin body looked like a clumsy little kitten. He waddled uncomfortably through the ankle-high snow and couldn't help but complain, couldn't we just stay in the town? Of course not. Wearing a white robe with a crossbow strapped to his back, Jom looked even smaller than Terry, but his eyes gleamed brightly. He reminded people of a mischievous mouse. He said his words boldly and without hesitation. Right now, the first half of the Valley of the Tragic Dead is always filled with people, it's a complete mess, we can't get any exploring done. And we can't beat the Living Dead cellar yet, if we keep going on like this, we're never gonna get to reclass. We could go to the Grey Fjord Point, the frogmen there make amazing fish soup. Terry thought back to the taste of the warm fish soup, drooling at the memory. Even though the Grey Fjord Point is big and full of fish, the problem is we couldn't catch any. Jom let out a sigh. We might as well go join the crowd at the Valley of the Tragic Dead. I'm seeing a lot of players going to the underground hideout of Lancaster, there might be something good there. Terry tightened his leather vest around his small torso, but his metal armor was still leeching away his body heat. If not for the couple of warm beverages he packed in his backpack, he would rather die than go out in this sort of weather. Those people are going there to complete the Lord's Light Illuminates the Land quest. It's that weekly quest to help recruit new followers. People who have completed it say the quest rewards are pretty good, Jom answered simply, more focused on his surroundings than on the conversation. Terry's eyes lit up. Then how about we? Apparently a lot of players have been reported as cultists by their new recruits, some 7 or 8 players are already hung outside of Lancaster's city walls. If you'd like to become a wall decoration too, be my guest, Jom said with a blank expression. I was just joking. Terry gave a small laugh hoping to gloss over the topic. But you haven't told me yet why we're coming all this way. Previously when I went to get a daily quest from the temporary Overlord Hall, I snuck a look at a map of somewhere near here on the Overlord's desk. If I'm right, straight ahead is the Trinea Forest, also known as the Forest of Monsters. This was when Jom finally explained his motives for their trek. There's definitely going to be monsters for us to hunt there, we won't have to worry about promoting anymore. Oh, nice going. Terry gave a weak applause. Suddenly, the two of them felt a chill run down their spines. The scent of wild beasts permeated through the air. A split second later, a giant beast emerged from among the snowy woods, leaping towards Terry. The daze had long left Terry's eyes, rolling away from the beast's attack with lightning-fast reactions. If Edward or Elena were there, they would know that the beast that suddenly appeared before them was the same species as the Dragonfang that attacked their village. The food shortage of winter had an obvious effect on the apex predator among non-monster creatures like the Dragonfang. Its movements and attacks were noticeably more sporadic than the Dragonfang that attacked their village. The two young players looked at the level 10 hovering above their enemy's head, as well as its half-emptied health bar. After confirming that the Dragonfang wasn't a boss or elite enemy, they dropped all worries and decided to get rid of it on the spot. The moment the Dragonfang went for its second tackle and Jom and Terry unsheathed their weapons, a feathered arrow lodged itself in the Dragonfang's left eye, affecting its path of attack. A man wearing a thick fur coat leapt out from behind the two boys, knocking them both to the ground as they were channeling their abilities. He cancelled their abilities, but also helped them avoid the Dragonfang's attack. Following the man were many more people dressed warmly for the cold winter, all using simple weapons like bows and pitchforks to overpower the already half-blind Dragonfang. The Dragonfang looked like a pin cushion with how many arrows were sticking out of its body, and its rage knocked down 2 trees before breathing its last breath, fighting and struggling all the way. The men in fur coats cheered in joy and the sight. Until now did Jom and Terry only regain their bearings, they didn't know whether to celebrate or to cry. Were they raided by a group of regular hunters? No, looking at their weapons, these men might not even be hunters. The men seemed like they had been staking out the site for quite some time, their exposed eyes and faces were already a frostbitten shade of purple. Jom didn't have the heart to voice his frustration. Which village are you from, children? The middle-aged man who tackled them pulled them up from the snowy ground. We're from near the Valley of the Tragic Dead. Jom signaled to Terry to stay quiet, giving the man a vague answer. The man wasn't suspicious of them, but he made his thoughts on the matter quite apparent. Do your grown ups not care for you? Running all the way here, don't you know how dangerous the forest is during winter? I wouldn't have come here if it wasn't, Jom thought to himself. If the man had continued to lecture them, Jom might have fought back. Luckily the man let the topic go, going back to his gentle self. Whatever, after all we've finally hunted down a beast, you two should come to our village from some stew. After you've warmed up a bit I'll send you back home, the middle-aged man asked for their opinion. Terry looked at Jom, the latter nodded their head. The men seemed to be doing this out of kindness, they didn't need to decline. To be completely honest, it didn't matter even if the men had some nefarious plan, Jom was confident that a player of his level had nothing to fear. They had trekked for a whole day and had their only kill stolen from them. If the men betrayed them later, he would let them know what was a true gamer's rage. The other villagers had tied up the dragon Fong on a wooden frame from God knows where, some 10 to 20 people working together to lift the beast back home. Jom couldn't help but question their intelligence slightly. Couldn't they use that frame as a makeshift sleigh and save their energy? But the villagers all seemed to be in high spirits, they must have been proud of their successful hunt, so Jom didn't dampen their mood. Not long later, the group reached a nearby settlement. The village was hidden in a cave and had 30 to 40 houses and families, their headcount might have even exceeded the unnamed town. Chapter 90. Always take out the rider first, sounds like logic to me. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. It was evident that the Dragon Fong had been terrorizing the village for quite some time. The villagers looked like they were celebrating the harvest festival as the hunters hauled the corpse of the Dragon Fong back to town. The hunters were welcomed like heroes. The villagers even welcomed the two strangers Jom and Terry to sit beside the bonfire and enjoy a warm meal. Food in the village was simple, just some regular rye crisp bread. The hunters were diligently working to fully butcher the large dragon Fong, slicing it up into palm-sized steaks and handing them to the women of the village who cooked them on the bonfire and served them to the rest of the villagers. Even the bones didn't go to waste, the women tossed the bones into a large clay pot filled with water and brought it to a boil. After skimming off the scum formed on the surface and adding some leaves from a plant Jom didn't recognize, the whole mixture was simmered slowly. Not long later, the wonderfully delicious meat stew was finished. If let to cook for longer, even more flavor could be introduced into the soup, but the villagers obviously couldn't wait any longer, all eager to finally start their feast. Maybe it was because their village was isolated in a snowy cave, but it felt like the villagers hadn't had a good hearty meal like this in quite some time. Jom and Terry had only taken their first taste of the stew when most villagers had already emptied their wooden bowls. Some excited kids were running to the pot asking for seconds. You guys are believers of the god of the harvest, right? When Jom first entered the villager, he noticed something akin to a totem pole right by the entrance, the symbol of the god of the harvest, Markelo. Only if the village's population was over 100, and all villagers were believers of the god of the harvest, would the Garden of Grains, the Church of the God of the Harvest, erect such an idol in the village. It was a common symbol of pride. Whenever deities created divine miracles, their idols would also be given a share of that power, and the subsequent aura they emitted gave the villagers special buffs as well. Other deities had their own idols similar to this one. For the Church of the God of Games, it was sort of like the Life Stone. Jom curiously asked the middle-aged hunter next to him, I hear that the God of the Harvest casted his divine miracle down to our realm this year. Since your village is recognized by the Garden of Grains, the village's harvest should have been pretty decent, so why do you guys look like you're in the middle of a famine? Since the Vala Empire's under the brilliant White Church, besides the Garden of Grains, our village has to pay its taxes to the brilliant White Church as well. Plus, with the White Church starting their one-year war against the Temple of Glory, taxes this year have been particularly steep to help prepare army rations. After all that, we don't have much." The hunter stopped himself mid-sentence, startled that he was voicing his frustrations with the church out loud, cold sweat running down his back. "What do you kids know, asking questions like these?" He tried to brush the two boys off. "I'm just curious," John replied. He continued asking, "They're basically bullying you guys at this point, why don't you say anything?" "Watch your mouth, kiddo." The hunter shook his head in defeat, whispering into John's ear, "The elders of the village say that deities are one with the church. To dishonor the church is to dishonor the gods. If you're caught, you'll be hanged dead on the town walls." John didn't like what he was hearing. "So you guys are wimps, barely scraping by in the shadows of the infallible church. You kids these days, what do you mean scraping by? When there wasn't a war, our village was pretty well off." The hunter was obviously displeased at how John called him a wimp. "It's just that taxes are higher during times of war. Do you know what war is? It takes people's lives. Before sending those hardened soldiers to battle, of course we'd have to make sure they were eating right." "Humph," John didn't reply further. How could he not know what war was? He and Terry lost their families in that aforementioned one-year war. If it weren't for the Church of the God of Games taking them under their wing, the two of them would probably have still been rummaging through garbage for food outside the town walls of Wickedor. "John, are you not gonna eat? The bread's pretty good." Terry was happily munching on his hard rye crisp bread, not really interested in the grilled meat the villagers were drooling over. The most abundant food in the unnamed town was grilled meat, even though it definitely had enough seasoning. They were getting pretty tired of it. That was also the main reason why the frogman's relatively unseasoned Grey Fjord Point fish soup was quickly becoming a fan favorite among players. John took a bite of his rye crisp bread. Other than being as hard as rock, it tasted surprisingly similar to the sweet biscuits his mother used to make. He was suddenly reminded of his parents, engulfed by the same flames that devoured their home. The scars on his heart split open once again and he felt the same pain he had back then. If only could he have known of the God of Games before then, if only he could have followed the deity sooner, his mom and dad wouldn't have died. John took another look at the villagers, once again feeling his gratitude towards the God of Games. Before everything had happened, John used to mock all the mindless believers that sang endless praise whenever the God of Games was mentioned. Although he couldn't beat the God of the Harvest in terms of sheer size, the God of Games still gave rich lives to his believers. Unlike the God of the Harvest who watched idly as he stole the fruits of labor of his believers, the God of Games gave his believers the power to fight back. The various raids and activities he held seemed to be teaching his players that no matter how treacherous the road to victory was, they all had the right to fight for themselves. Their world didn't run by the rules of to each its own, but John knew that the villagers weren't going to change beliefs with the God of the Harvest's totem pole in their village, so he didn't plan on trying to convert any of them to believe in the God of Games. They would prepare to leave as soon as they were finished with dinner. At most they would help hunt some small animals as a show of appreciation towards the villagers. Visit web novel live if you like manga, comics. Just as John opened his mouth, a startled boy stumbled out of the shadows. He knocked over a small fire pit in his rush, the clattering pot attracting the attention of the villagers. "Nate, aren't you supposed to be guarding the entrance?" an old man who seemed like the village elder asked the visibly shaken guard. N.N.N.N.N. Not good. The villager was quivering from head to toe, his beady black eyes showed uncontainable fear. "The mountain bandits are here." As if someone had pressed the mute button, the previously bustling villagers all fell deadly silent, leaving all the sound of the crackling firewood whispering through the air. "How far are they from the village?" The village elder was the first to break the silence, asking the villager seriously. They're not far." The villager was scared to tears, voice cracking from fear. "They'll be here any second." The news dropped like a nest of angry hornets. The villagers were hysteric, running around deciding whether they should find a place to hide or try to flee the village before the bandits came. "Calm down. Calm down." The old man tried to maintain order. "As long as we give them food, the bandits won't take any lives. But it proved useless, the villagers still screaming and shouting over each other. Just then, a loud bang boomed above the noise, even the earth seemed to be trembling. Everyone froze, slowly looking towards the source of the sound. There sat two calm-faced teenagers. One was slightly shorter, donning a white robe and brown hair. He held a metal war hammer in the shape of a cross. The end of the cross was indented in a wok-sized divot in the ground. That was the source of the loud noise. "Thanks for the warm welcome." The other, slightly taller, blue-haired boy stood up as well, sticking his tongue out to lick the crisp bread crumbs on his lips and unsheathed the long sword on his back. "As thanks, let us handle these bandits." Jom looked at the still stunned villagers and gave them a small smile before walking to the village entrance with Terry. The middle-aged hunter from before tried desperately to stop them. "Wait. These aren't your average mountain bandits." "Don't worry, we're not your average kids either," Jom replied, making sure to put emphasis on the word kid. "He's right. I'm telling you, we're pretty strong." Terry broke into a smile too, as if to show off his strength. He tried to flex his biceps, but his twig-like arms had the complete opposite effect on the villagers. The villagers had worry written all over their faces, but it was too late to stop them as the bandits had already reached their village entrance. It was then that Jom finally got to properly see these so-called mountain bandits. To put it briefly, they were bandits in patched-up clothes riding chocobos, but they were different from the starving villagers. These bandits obviously ate well and were much fitter and healthier. For weapons, the bandits chose the easy-to-wield long cavalry sword. They were storming forward unrelentingly, similar to cavalry on Earth. Armies of foot soldiers could be completely overwhelmed by a team of well-trained cavalry. The mental stress of facing mounted enemies was debilitating. Add onto that the power of a herd of chocobos. They were technically even stronger than the average medieval armored cavalry unit back on Earth. But for Jom and Terry, they didn't even pose a threat. The reason was simple. Why are they only level 5? That's so bad. Terry raised his long sword. I could beat these guys with a hand tied behind my back. Their chocobos are level 8. The cleric Jom was making his pre-battle preparations behind him. Aim for their heads. Thus, before the battle had even begun, the rushing mountain bandits looked at the two young boys trying to stop them and laughed at their feeble attempt, but some of them felt a chill run down their spine, warning them of what was to come.